Today I want to talk to you about adoption. I am an adoptive parent and I was adopted from foster care when I was 6.5. And adoption has touched probably every part of my life and probably more people's lives than you realize. Like almost everybody I talk to has had a sibling that's adopted or a cousin or knows somebody that just adopted or is trying to adopt. And so it's a big deal. And I want to say that a lot of adoptive parents, especially if you're listening to me, have thought even before 8 o'clock this morning, why does this feel so hard? You've watched your friend's child throw a tantrum at Target and you thought, oh, that's cute. Call me when your child threatens to run away because you asked them to put on shoes or is hitting you or has a full down meltdown because they didn't like the oatmeal for breakfast. Maybe you sat in a parenting class where someone suggested just use a sticker chart and you wanted to stand up and say, ma'am, my child would burn down the sticker chart. If you've hidden ace bandages, if you've taken doorknobs off bedroom doors, slept with one eye open, and wondered if your child missed a seminar on this is how families work, you're not alone. And here's what I want you to know. Adoptive parenting is not harder because you're failing as a parent or because you don't have a good connection with this child and it's just, somehow a fault of yours that you're just not a good adoptive parent. You are not simply raising a child. You're raising a child while helping them to make sense of loss, trauma, genetics, identity, grief, attachment, and often neurodevelopment challenges. Today, I want to talk to you about why adoptive parenting is so different and understanding why your child is responding differently than maybe other children that you've parented. Maybe even if you've had a lot of foster kids, or maybe you've even adopted before, but you have this one child. So the first thing is just to acknowledge that your child had a life before you. And I also work with a lot of adoptive parents that adopted babies. Children were very young. They had them in their home, before they were 2 years old. But research tells us that babies recognize voices, smells, rhythms, and connection even in utero. So that separation matters. And not only that, the trauma that happened to them in utero that they had no control over. Of course, most trauma we don't have any control over. That's what makes it traumatic. But the things that happened that didn't normally happen, prenatal care, lack of alcohol and drug use. Some kids are not given the benefit of a good, healthy out of utero existence. And for some children, that loss is compounded by multiple caregivers, foster placements, neglect, abuse, institutional care, inconsistent nurturing. Many children enter adoptive families carrying experiences that they cannot explain and memories that they don't. And here's what makes it complicated. Children don't grieve loss the same way that adults do. We might cry, we might take a day off of work or a month off of work or be able to talk to somebody about our loss or our grief. And children, they act it out. And grief can look like rage, it can look like rejecting caregivers, controlling behaviors, sabotage, pushing parents away, anxiety, perfectionism, controlling everything. I remember working with a family whose child would become explosive every single birthday, and not just their own birthday, other people's birthdays. They would ruin everybody else's day. And everyone, thinks that birthdays should be happy, but birthdays remind a child of everything that they've lost. A lot of adoptive kids are wondering if their birth parents remember that they were born this day. And a child might not say, I'm grieving. Instead, they just throw the cake or have a bad attitude all day long. And that's because sometimes unresolved grief, it looks different And it looks different in adults than it does in children. Now, understanding that loss doesn't excuse the behavior, but it can change how we respond. The second thing is that control is different. All children are going to seek for control. They're learning how to have autonomy. Your typical 2-year-old is going to say no because they're trying to figure that out. They're figuring out where they start and others begin, and all of that. Your teenager can roll their eyes because developmentally that's where they're at. They're trying to gain that independence. But children who have experienced early loss, they fight for control from a whole different place of normal. And for many adopted children, control equals safety. Remember, chaos and trauma have the effect that they do on us because of the lack of control. And in a lot of kids that have been adopted that come from hard places, they have seen adults be very unpredictable, and rules have not been followed by adults. Boundaries were crossed that shouldn't have been crossed. Caregivers might have disappeared, needs went unmet. Sometimes older children, even if they're only 3 years old, are taking care of younger children. And a child that comes from these hard places can automatically reject the trust and care of other adults. And a lot of times they're not going to just believe that adults are. It's not because they're trying to manipulate you, and it's not even because they're trying to control everything like we think. And it's definitely not because these kids are evil. Even though I have seen it in kids that have reactive attachment disorder, I've seen their eyes change and it's like a blackness that takes over, right? But they are not trying to ruin your life. They are not trying to ruin your vacation. They are not trying to ruin your birthday or Mother's Day or, Christmas. But it can feel that way for sure. What they're really asking is, can I trust you? Are you going to stay? Are you safe? And again, this can happen with kids that are very young when they come into your care. Will you still love me if I lose control, if I have a meltdown, if I'm, terrible and horrible? And I tell parents, your child's not giving you a hard time. Your child is having a hard time, and they're making sure that you can survive it. And that's why some children argue with everything, about everything. And that also has to do with the way that their brain is wired. We know that trauma affects the brain wiring and changes it. So when you say time for bed, they say, actually, according to international law, I don't think so. You say, please put your dishes away, and suddenly you're in a 45-minute constitution. Because the issue isn't really the dishes. The issue is who's in charge and can I trust them? And parents think, if I can just win this power struggle, then things are going to improve. But really, children who fear losing control often are going to escalate if you just try to overpower them through these power struggles. Leadership and not domination is what creates safety. And it is a lot different than what you're going to hear from a lot of other parenting experts even. The third thing is that genetics matter. Adopted children don't arrive with a blank slate. They come with genetics. They have their own temperament, their personality, their strengths, their challenges, and not all of it's based on what they've been through, but they also have their predispositions to the way things are going to go. And some parents are shocked when they discover that despite their very calm and organized personalities, their child has inherited every impulsive gene available. You may be parenting a child who's highly sensitive, who is naturally anxious, who's extremely intense, who is always seeking, sensory seeking something new, anything to get that dopamine hit. They might be very impulsive and strong-willed. And you may see some of those things in yourself. I kind of like it if parents are going to be strong-willed too, because you're not going to want to just give up, right, on this child. And here's the important part. You cannot parent the genetics out of a child. We get to shape, we get to support, and we are going to teach skills. But understanding temperament can allow us to stop personalizing the behavior. So instead of why are you doing this to me, we're asking like, what does this child need to succeed? How do we come around this in a different way so that they understand and they can be successful? And that's a completely different question than, how do I get them to stop doing this thing that feels like it's, ruining everything. Prenatal, this is the fourth thing. Prenatal exposure changes the picture. And I don't think that in our society we talk about this enough. I think that we talk and vent and are upset about what we see, and a lot of times we're trying to medicate the behaviors and the outcomes, but it's very difficult unless you have the family history of what happened to really get a diagnosis for kids that may have been exposed to drugs, high levels of stress in utero, or alcohol. There's different things that happen in the brain at different stages of the pregnancy, and so it doesn't always fit a pattern that people can diagnose if they don't have any idea from the parents, the birth parents. Many adoptive parents are actually parenting children that have been affected by prenatal alcohol or drug exposure. A lot of birth parents will say, well, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I stopped drinking, or I stopped using drugs, or maybe they just say they cut back, right? There are still doctors that will tell pregnant women that it's okay to have a little bit of alcohol. And really, it changes everything, because children impacted by prenatal exposure, and you may not know, it may not be in the records. It wasn't in any of my son's records, but he can remember when he was younger that his parents drank a lot. And we can assume that things were not going as they should. And there were other signs, right? But these kids are they're going to struggle with executive functioning, with impulse control, with memory, with emotional regulation. And it's not just, your dad, acted like this and he's in prison, it's they can't just do this on their own. If they could do better, they would. Cause and effect thinking is really harmed by prenatal exposure. The ability to be flexible, to process different sensory things. So parents will tell me, well, they know better. Like they've been with me since they were, a newborn, or they've been with me since they were 2 years old and they know better. Well, maybe, and this is the thing that's very hard about prenatal exposure, is that sometimes kids do know better, and that's part of executive functioning. And they can tell you the right answer on the right day, but they can't carry that. Because they know what to do here, because they can tell me what they should do in my office, doesn't mean that they're going to be able to access that information when they need it the most. And also, there's good days and bad days when you have prenatal exposure. So one day, yes, they know all their multiplication tables and they are doing great and get all their math finished, and the next day they can't do the first problem. That is not defiance. It's not defiance. It's what's going on in their brain. Executive functioning is the brain's management system. And when that system is impaired, children are going to repeatedly fail at tasks that they genuinely want to accomplish. And it's tough. This is one of the hardest things about undiagnosed fetal alcohol, drug exposed kids. One time I worked with a parent who said, I have told him to brush his teeth every single day for 8 years. He knows this pattern. And I said, well, how's that working? She laughed. Apparently not very well. Because some children need extra supports. They're going to need routines, visual reminders, co-regulation, scaffolding, and not more lectures. We can't punish a brain into developing. Traditional parenting doesn't always work. If you're listening to this and you are struggling with different things, you are like, yeah, we know that. Many adoptive parents discover strategies that work beautifully with one child, even if you have more than one adopted child, and yet have it completely fail with another. And some of the things that I have found over the years do not work at all with most kids that are come from hard places, especially if they have the trauma background, but also neurodivergent kids, is sticker charts, timeouts, loss of privileges, not just grounding, but taking things away, consequences, especially delayed consequences or consequences that have nothing to do with what they did, behavior plans. Sometimes these strategies can help, and I can help you to build these in a way that will actually work. But a lot of times, if without knowing what else to do, these completely implode, or they work for a little bit of time and then they implode. And that's because behavior is communication, and children impacted by trauma often operate from survival stress, and you may be operating from survival stress by now too. And when a child's dysregulated, their thinking brain is offline. And so we have to help our kids, we have to teach them to move into executive functioning and develop those skills so that they're not just operating out of the emotional part of their brain. You're not going to be able to reason with a child who is in fight, flight, freeze, or flop. But it can sound like it, because they can throw things out there that sound like they are trying to logically argue with you. You can regulate them, and you can teach them to regulate. Even kids that have severe ADHD, I help parents to help those kids to regulate. And connection is super important. And before anyone panics, connection does not mean permissiveness. Connection does not mean no boundaries. And connection does not mean that you have to feel a certain way towards your child. I have a lot of adoptive parents I've worked with that are burned out and they're tired and they don't even want to be around this kid at times, as terrible as that sounds to say. And so they're like, I don't want to connect. And you have kids that are saying, I don't want to connect. Never forget one of the best notes I ever got from a kid. It was before she had even met me. She wrote me this note and said, what makes you think that I want to be closer to my family? It's like, right? We don't know yet. And so it doesn't require a lot of feelings. It's getting a connection that happens, in their body first. It means that you can be calm, even if somebody else is falling apart, and that you can stay present and without becoming frightening, and that you can lead without shaming. And children need both nurture and structure, not one or the other. They're going to need both. Identity and grief are lifelong. Adoption is not a one-time event. It's lifelong. And if you had a child as a foster kid and you had some rough patches, but then when you adopted them, it was like something broke loose. This is what happens, right? This is part of them figuring out, who am I and how do I live in a family? And they have some identity issues, who do I look like, and why was I placed? Why did you want me? My son used to ask that all the time. Why do you want to adopt me? Why do you want me? Why do you still want me? And some kids can't verbalize that. They want to know if they are just fitting in or if they belong. And a lot of times kids that are adopted are going to revisit these questions at different developmental stages. So you may feel like, yeah, the first year was rough and then it was great for a while and now we're having some similar problems, right? If my child wants to know about their biological family, does that mean that they don't love me? These are things that I help adoptive parents to deal with. And if the biological family comes with a lot of ongoing chaos and trauma, do we have to keep this relationship going? Love is not easy. It's not an easy emotion for kids that have no grounds to trust anybody. In fact, it's the trust that has to be built isn't this child, you just trusting this child. Like, they have to learn to trust adults in their life. So if you remember nothing else from today, please remember this, that your child's behavior makes sense in the context of their whole story. And it doesn't mean that we're just going to excuse unsafe behavior. If you're dealing with unsafe behavior, please, contact me. We need to get understanding before intervention. And adoptive parents, you kind of have to be a detective and not just a judge. And so you're going to want to ask, what happened to this child? And what does this behavior tell me? And what skill is missing? And that's the part that is the hardest to get at. The skills that are missing, that's what the behaviors are showing us. But how do we develop those skills so that we can have healthy functioning and we can enjoy our family and we can ride in the car together or go on a trip or change the schedule and not have a complete meltdown? You don't have to do this alone. Adoptive parenting, I don't think, should be done in isolation, and you're going to need support. You need people that understand, you need practical tools, and you need hope, because healing does happen in relationships, and it really does matter, even on the days when it doesn't feel like this. So I want to tell you that I have parent support groups that are starting or getting them filled up right now. So I'm going to put in the description the link for you to look at the sign up for that and make a decision if you want to be part of those parenting groups. I really encourage it. They're going to be 6 weeks long, once a week, and we'll go over different topics, but mostly you'll have a chance to get coached on some of your most challenging things that you're dealing with.